Hi. I have to admit I was surprised twice when I saw what's in the update to MicroKORG 2. I thought it was just a synth. Apparently now it can also play slices in a sample. And if you turn on its arpeggiator, you can use that to cycle through the different slices based on which keys you press and the arpeggiator pattern. And then in a totally other way, it can become a new synth because you can now install user plugins on it and replace its built-in oscillator or effects. For example, this is my Steve Reich-inspired phase looping delay plugin, feeding into Sinevibes hollow reverb. And then perhaps the most original thing they did, they baked in an audio-based step sequencer or step sampler, which lets you accurately record slices into a loop, kind of like a time-inverted lazy chop, and then go ahead and mangle that loop by either repitching it or reslicing it in different ways like I showed you earlier. Besides that, they've also added a few new features. I'll cover those briefly as well. Before I start, as usual, Korg didn't pay me to make this video, have any say over its content, or see it before it's published, but you could say it's sponsored by my plugin and supporters on Patreon. Okay, let's dive in and start with the user plugins. Up until now, MicroKORG 2, like pretty much any other synth made by other companies, was limited to whatever oscillators and effects the manufacturer decided to include in it. They've got some nice ones here, both on the oscillator side and on the effects side. I've covered them in my review linked below, but there are certainly many other interesting ideas that they've not covered. In the past few years, Korg has released a number of synths that anyone can develop plugins and effects for. The Prologue, Drumlogue, Minilog XD, NTS1, and NTS3. And the cool thing about what they did is that they didn't put any limits or guardrails on who can develop plugins or what they make. Also, developers don't need to pay Korg and don't need Korg's approval to do whatever they want. And indeed, there's a plethora of free and paid options now available you can choose from for Korg's other devices. The picture isn't entirely rosy though. Developers need to adapt plugins to get them to work from synth to synth, either slightly or a lot, and recompile them, which takes a bit of time and effort. So on day one, none of these lovely plugins that you see here will work on MicroKORG 2 unless they're recompiled, and there's no guarantee their developer will take the time to convert them in the future. Okay, let's dive in and see how this works, both on the oscillator and effects side. As you browse through the factory options for oscillators and effects, and sweep all the way to the right, you'll see a user option. Once you've selected that, you'll see all the installed options by turning the knob right next to it. In this case, we've got only 2 user oscillators installed. Both of these come from Korg in the new update. One important thing, you lose oscillators 2 and 3. Rather, when you press this button, you'll see more parameters potentially for that plugin based on what the developer included. You still get the noise generator, and you see that in the mixer as well. Oscillators 2 and 3, though, aren't available anymore. Let's take a brief look at the new Korg oscillators in this update. I'll start with waves. It's got 2 oscillator wave shapes, and you can morph between the 2 using the shape control. There's also a sub oscillator. You choose the second shape on the next page, and the waveform for the sub oscillator, ring mod, bit crusher. So that's waves in a nutshell. And then there's Vox, a syllable or vowel generator, with 4-band controls, resonance, and noise mix. I don't have any others to show you. Hopefully developers will come up with more in the future. There are 32 slots in here potentially, so you can install quite a few of these on board. And then on the effects side, the situation is similar. You can install 32 effects in each of the 3 slots. You can only use 1 at a time per slot, but you can have plenty on board. Unlike the Korg NTS3, you can't put any plugin into any slot. So if a developer, say, developed a delay plugin, you can only put it in the delay effects slots. Same goes for mod and reverb. You also choose these the same way, so you'll see the factory options using this knob 1. And if you turn the knob all the way To the right, you'll get to the user slot, in which case you can select one from all the plugins you've installed. Let's take a look and listen to how user plugins work and self-promotion alert phase loop op, kindly coded by my son. Proceeds go to him. This effect is based on Steve Reich's phased looping technique. Imagine recording audio into 2 tape loops panned hard left and hard right, but one loop is slightly shorter than the other. This can result in continuously shifting patterns even if you play one single note into it. Of course, it gets more interesting if you play more than one note. Creating very interesting evolving textures. If you set the time parameter to very low, it sounds like an interesting ping pong delay. Maybe even like a reverb. But the fun starts when you take it to a second, above, or even up to 5 seconds, where you can really take the time to explore what it comes up with. If you put feedback at 100%, the loop will go on forever, and you can shorten the time as you go along and overdub entirely new additional layers on top of it. If you change the ratio or time during looping, you might get a few clicks in the loop, so be mindful of that. If you extend the time, it'll remember whatever was in the buffer before, for better or worse, so you might get sounds recorded earlier in the session. And there's a page 2 of parameters. Ratio determines how much shorter one of the loops is compared to the longer one. The closer it is to 100, the more subtle and interesting I think is how the combined pattern evolves. And just explore different ratios if you want. And let's let it die down a bit. You've also got a send or overdub level. So you can overdub lower level loops into the loop, or just turn overdub all the way down and play on top of the loop without adding content into it. And you can change the sound obviously entirely if you want. If you want to erase the buffer, just set time to the maximum and feedback to 0, and it will gradually erase everything, or just reload the plugin and the buffer will be clean. And then one other interesting thing, if you set the ratio to 100%, and of course don't forget to turn up overdub, then this plugin becomes a very interesting kind of sound-on-sound looper. If feedback is under 100%, then loops will gradually fade out as you record new ones. If you set it to 100%, it's just a regular looper. And if you want to play on top of a loop, again, go back to the second page, lower overdub, and just play on top of the loop. So now you've got another looper in addition to the built-in factory one, only this one can be sent into the reverb effect, unlike the built-in looper. And it also has this interesting decaying sound-on-sound feature. So that's my plugin, and then Sinevibes are making a whole bunch of modulation, delay, and reverb effects plugins available, a couple for free as well. You've been hearing their hollow reverb, by the way, all along. Let's just briefly listen to what they've got to offer. I'll start with the mod effects slots. Again, go into mod and choose user. MorphEQ, by the way, is the bundled plugin from Korg. It's an EQ. And then from Sinevibes, these first two are free. Atom is a multi-mode, multi-stage filter with an LFO to move it around. And you've got a few filter types, mod depth and rate controls. And then again, if I'm not mistaken, they're also offering drift for free. This is an LFO that modulates level, pan, and a filter. And then they've got a few paid ones. I won't go through the parameters of all of them. Whirl is a barber pole phaser. Vibrant, a deep phaser. Stator is a wobble simulator. Shift is a frequency shifter. Dipole is a through-zero flanger. DSM8, or Decimate, is a sample rate and bit depth reduction plugin. Then there's corrosion, one of my favorites, with multiple types of distortion. And then there's blend, which is a multi-voice chorus. Then on the delay side, rerun is a self-randomizing repeater, isomer, an ensemble delay, integer, an analog style delay buffer, with feedback going over 100%, which is always fun. And then there's finite, which is a feedbacking pitch shifter. So those are the delays, and on the reverb side, they've got hollow, which is just a nice long reverb. Then there's luminance, which is a shimmer reverb. And you can set the pitch shift, I presume, to go down or up. And then there's albedo, which is a granular reverb. You can set the grain size. And you can, of course, combine these plugins. Sinevibes says some of their plugins are pretty processor intensive, so two should work together side by side pretty well. But if you use three together and max out polyphony, you might get some artifacts. These are well worth taking a look at, I think. Okay, so those are third-party developers running on MicroKORG 2. The next big new thing is a very interesting update to the audio looper that lets you step sample into the loop and then arpeggiate your way through loop slices. Let me explain. When it came out, MicroKORG 2 had, very non-traditionally, an audio looper rather than a note-based MIDI sequencer. So if you wanted to create a sequence, you had to perform it in real-time live. So hit record, play, you get a metronome, but you're pretty much on your own, and you could record live into the looper, but if your timing was off, you're out of luck. An advantage of this, by the way, is that the looper does have overdub, so you can add additional layers, and there's also an undo. So it's a cool option to have, but it's not the same as a rigid step sequencer. Also, if you wanted to automate any parameters, you'd have to do it live as you were playing. Of course, once you're done, you can't edit the loop. It's just an audio loop. You can change the tempo, but that will change the pitch for better or worse. There's no granular time stretch here. So interestingly, rather than add a regular MIDI sequencer, Korg decided to double down on audio looping, and they've added what they call step record, which is an audio-based step sequencer, and if you've never seen one, well, neither have I. Everything is still audio-based as opposed to MIDI-based, but now the playhead will let you record into the loop buffer step by step. You'll want to set your tempo before in the arpeggiator, because that will determine the note length alongside the note length or step length parameter, and you'll want to set the overall length of the loop up to 8 bars or 128 steps. And then step decay is an interesting one, but let's ignore that for a second. So let's set this to 8 steps and start recording, and you'll see how it moves through the audio loop buffer as I press every additional note. And we've got a step sequencer. And again, this is audio, so if I change the tempo now, it'll repitch. And I could continue to overdub on top of this if I wanted. So a few interesting things. First thing, it's not a monophonic sequencer. You could record, for example, chords into each step. So that's that. Let's clear that. This also supports overdubs. So let's say that I will play this as a first loop. If I continue to record into this, we won't hear it because it doesn't play it back, but I'm actually overdubbing now. So this is what the two layers sound like. Obviously, it would be nice if they played back what was previously recorded when you overdub. We can also change the timbre of the sound any way we like as we move from step to step. So let's activate step record. I could record, say this is the first step, and then go totally wild with any sound design choice, with as many changes as I want on each new step, including filter and effects. You can insert rests, by the way, by pressing the play button. So that's an inserted rest. Let's hear that. Now, if our sound has a slightly long release, or we just want things to blend more smoothly, then if we keep things as they are in the default settings with 0 step decay, you won't hear the release as that step is recorded. That's what the step decay is for. It goes up to a whole nother step, so you can't record long reverb tails with it, but it does make for smoother transitions. Just be mindful to wait until the recording of the entire step, including the decay, is over. Let's take a listen to that. So as you can hear, the transitions are smoother. Now, a step isn't just limited to a single note or chord. You can record whatever you want within the time that you have in the step length. So let's maybe make our step lengths a little bit longer. So this bar won't have many steps, but we can play longer phrases into each step. For example, strums. So now this is our sequence. And you can also record incoming audio into these loops as well. There are no ties, by the way, but you can change the step length mid-sequence. So say if I wanted to tie a long chord, I could play that, and then just change the step sequence to shorter notes. And that's going to be recorded too. And then one last feature, if you record a step and you make a mistake, you can hit this button, clear or undo, to go back, but that also deletes the decay. So this works best when you're not recording with step decay. So that's step record or step sampling, which opens up a whole new world of interesting opportunities I've not seen anywhere else. I mean, obviously you could use other samplers to sample individual steps and then overlay them next to each other, but the speed and ease of use of this makes it interesting and fun to explore, I think, in a way you can't anywhere else. And then the second new important looping feature is slice playback. This isn't that unheard of in the sampling world. Now, to make this interesting, I'm going to load up one of the existing loops on the internal drive, which is, by the way, a new feature. You can now load up stored loops. Anyway, let's load this. And you can see this loop was recorded at 170 BPM, so I could go in to the ARP and set my tempo to 170. So this is the loop, but to make things interesting, I'll slow it down. So I've loaded the loop, but the synth still plays as it did before, unless we go into looper slice mode. So now the entire synth audio engine is disabled, and the first 32 notes play one of 32 different starting points within the loop. So I could start there, or here, or here, or here. And you can see the loop pointer jump around as I do this. The pitch bend wheel still works, so you can do cool things like this. And the mod wheel reverses sample playback, and you can do this mid-playback. So this lets you play around with the original sample and play it in a different order. Let's say, for example, now, triggering slices is cool, but where things get even more interesting is if we bring in the arpeggiator. Let me load up a different loop. Let's say go with this one. So this is a drum loop, and we can again speed it up or slow it down. Let's go for something that's close to the original tempo. So this is the basic groove. Let's go into loop slice mode. So we can play portions of the sample. But if we turn on the arpeggiator, we can arpeggiate our way through this pattern. So for example, let's start exploring. This is obviously just a repeating note. I could add octaves and just create grooves by adding notes. It can sound nice or not, depending on, what I press. Let's maybe latch this. We can play with different arpeggiator playback modes and octaves. And then interestingly, we can also add arpeggiator rhythms into this, in which case steps that are skipped will play for a longer portion of the loop. And check gate, it's better if it's at 100% to capture more of the sample. Let's maybe load up another drum loop for fun. So this is our original. And let's go into looper slice mode. And let's feel our way around the loop. When you latch the arpeggiator, be sure to turn key sync off so things stay in sync. I think this real-time slicing is really cool, especially for beats, but not just. One more interesting aspect of this, if you long press the play button, you'll get a few more settings. One of them is BPM scale. So this will pitch the sample and its playback time will change accordingly without changing the tempo of the internal arpeggiator. So say if I wanted to slow down the arpeggiator, but not repitch the sample, have it at the original pitch, then I would increase the BPM scale. There are a few supporting features for this. I already showed you that you can load up loops. There are a couple of import modes. I'll show you the differences on screen. You can transfer wave files on board. For some reason, these crashed the instrument, but they're not at the 48 kilohertz sample rate, so that may be it. You can now export loops you recorded onto the internal storage. There's only about 50 megabytes of free space on the internal drive for plugins and loops, so not much by today's standards. But these loops are about 2 megabytes each, so you can store about 25 of these on board. And you can always back these up on your computer, delete them, and put on new ones. And then you can also record loops into the looper from an external source, and there's a new mode to help with that, called audio trigger. So rather than turn the synth off and then go into USB drive mode and hook it up to your computer, transfer files, exit, reboot, you can actually sample loops through the internal input. Just set the length to the number of bars that you want to record, set the tempo of the synth in the arpeggiator to the tempo of your loop. That's important. And then most important, in the global settings, make sure auxiliary routing is pre-looper, not the default post-looper. Otherwise, what you play it won't be recorded into the looper. You can also set overdub over here to single, so that if your loop is longer than the time you set for recording, then it won't overdub over itself. So that's all the setup. Hit record, feed audio in the back, and this works very nicely with the loops that I tried. And then moving on to a completely new other feature. One of the new features in this update is that Oscillator 3 now has a low rate LFO mode, and that goes along with the new ability to point it to any destination in the mod matrix. So why is this important? The LFOs we get bundled are relatively simple shapes: triangle, saw, square, sample and hold. But you can now use any waveform you load up to Oscillator 3. So this crazy pitch modulation is actually a complex oscillator waveform. And I'm pointing it in the matrix to pitch, so it may sound annoying, but you can hear it's a totally unique mod source because it's based on whatever the waveform of sample 22 is in the DWGS engine. Use the pitch control of Oscillator 3 to determine its rate, whether it goes slow or fast. And if I change the sample, then you get a totally different LFO. So you can use basically any oscillator wave shape that's available for Oscillator 3. And these can be interesting repeating cycles or just the basic wave shapes. and things get particularly wild with the one-shots. And of course, it doesn't need to be as annoying as pitch modulation. You can point it to any available destination in the matrix, for example, the filter cutoff. So those are the main new things. Beside that, in dual timbre modes, we now have control over the split point. So you can now play two timbres side by side. You could now set the pitch bend range differently for up and down. Just hold the octave up or down buttons and you can see you're setting the pitch bends differently on the up or down direction. So I think this opens up a few creative options. And now, unless I missed something else, you can now set the scaling for levels and pannings in the vocoder for all bands at once. Finally, a quick word about installing plugins. Currently, there's no librarian to move them back and forth. I think Korg is coming out with one, but for now you need to restart the synth in drive mode by holding the 1 button when you restart it, and then copy the effects or oscillators into one of the available slot folders in the drive. Just make sure you put the effect in the right folder it was made for. So for example, the Phase Loop Op plugin is a delay type plugin, so it needs to go into one of the slots in the delay folder. Okay, let's talk about pros and caveats. I don't think there are really cons to a free update. So on the pros side, I think Korg should be commended for both such a big update with the step sampling and sliced playback, and of course for opening up their platform free to third-party developers. Few companies do this. Instead, the others prefer to lock down their platforms in walled gardens. Now, it isn't just about greed. Letting third-party developers mess with your platform is risky because you're going to be blamed for the bugs or crashes, so be mindful of that if you install a third-party plugin. And then Korg not taking a cut from developers' work or requiring permission may hurt revenues a bit short-term, but encourages innovation and long-term benefits the platform, I think. Then on the caveats side, just be aware that the log platform plugins that are already out there won't work as is on MicroKORG 2 because the developer needs to make a few small changes and recompile them. Also, the platform has about half the memory and less CPU overhead than other new generation Korg platforms like the NTS3 or NTS1 Mark II. So plugins may not have the same capabilities. And then one big wishlist item is that if you go into loop slicer mode, nothing in the synth except the arpeggiator works. It would be nice at the very least to be able to use the effects. And the cherry on top would be, of course, a bit of filtering or LFOs and so on. So that's it for the 2.0 update to MicroKORG 2. I'll leave a link to my plugin and those by Sinevibes below. And if you'd like a whole bunch of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, check out my ever-expanding book on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful. Ring the YouTube bell below to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.